Hello everyone and welcome to your next to last module in this class. So that is very exciting, and as you are noticing with this module, we are cramming a lot of information, a lot of content in as we kind of wrap up this summer session. So we were looking at chapters 13 and 14 of the Zunker text and looking at job loss and transition, the employment of adults and working age adults, and also individuals in recovery and employment and what that looks like. The recovery part of it is not in the textbook, but we felt that it was important to incorporate that into the instruction that you guys are receiving because it's a population that a lot of people are going to be working with. And so hopefully as you go through the resources, again, you'll find them useful and kind of be looking into the other opportunities that are available for individuals out there that are also in recovery and looking for jobs, because everybody needs to work. I think that's kind of this running theme of the entire summer, right? Everybody, people need to work, we want to work, and so I'm not going to go through all of the slides, but I'll just kind of briefly run through some key points here. If we're thinking about working in a career counseling capacity with somebody who is experiencing a job loss. Now, job losses can happen for a variety of reasons. Of course, somebody can get fired from a job for lack of performance, or it could be that a company is downsizing or outsourcing jobs, and so they're laying people off. The text, of course, talks about the recession and the impact the recession had on our workforce, and in turn, what career counselors could expect from working with people who had been terminated from employment during that recession. I think now, with the employment trends that we're seeing, we're kind of coming through that to a certain degree, but it absolutely was impactful. And even if you are working in a career counseling capacity with somebody that maybe currently has a job, maybe they're looking for a different type of job, and maybe that individual was experiencing a job loss, was terminated from employment during the recession, and has some residual anxiety and stress about the potential of losing another job down the road. So all of that can linger. If any of you have lost a job, if you have been terminated from employment, hopefully that hasn't exactly happened because of poor performance, but if you've lost a job, if you've gone through that transition period, it can be stressful. It's great for people that might have 2, 3, 4 months of money saved up in the bank, and they could experience a job loss and really it not impact them financially. But for a lot of people, we're working paycheck to paycheck. And whenever you go into a manager's office and you're laid off from a place of employment, or someplace that, especially that you've been employed for a long time, certainly that's going to have some residual effects, and not everybody's going to be prepared for that. So if you're thinking about, kind of the interventions that could be available for somebody experiencing a job loss, sometimes it depends on, for an individual that has been terminated or laid off, some companies do offer like severance packages, and sometimes those severance packages include meeting with an EAP counselor, meeting with career counselors, helping to provide job placement services for their employees who are now being displaced. Other types of interventions that could be offered are, of course, attending job fairs, being involved in job clubs if there are any that can be found or available, revamping job interviewing skills. For some individuals, maybe it is that they have been in the same career for a long period of time. They may have not updated a resume in 10, 15 plus years. It may be that they didn't even have to interview for the job when they first got it, and so they've never actually been through a job interview before. It's important, and I talk about this in the recovery aspect as well, it's important for people to practice how to explain a gap in employment, how to kind of provide that elevator pitch, that 60-second spiel about who the person is and the value that they could bring to the next company or organization that they work for. So there are important things that can be kind of intertwined within that career development process that have a lot to do with how the individual is presenting themselves. And it's also important, as if you're reading the case studies that were provided in Chapter 13, it's important that a career counselor working with somebody who has just been terminated from employment make sure that that person really truly is ready to go out and begin that job search process again. There can be those residual feelings of anger, resentment towards the employer, feelings that are related to our self-worth. Oftentimes even for people that are experiencing termination from employment because of a layoff, feel like it's their fault, that they did something wrong for that to happen. And this that's not necessarily unlike termination from employment for people with disabilities to a degree, right? So this kind of all works into what we know about rehab counseling as well. It may be that, when somebody is looking at a job loss, it's a complete shift in their career. It may be that somebody can be looking at their transferable skills. Maybe they're able to get a similar job in a different place of employment. It just depends. It's interesting to think about how different types of individuals react to job loss and how middle-aged men react more negatively than do older and younger men, and that women who lose their jobs report, that greater decline in general health than men do. So there can be more of an impact for a woman who has lost her job in terms of health than a man who has lost their job. So again, just kind of thinking about why we need to work. Our daily structure is devoted to work. Oftentimes we identify very strongly with our occupations, and if all of a sudden, out of the blue, if somebody's not expecting that or anticipating a job loss, to go from working a 9-to-5 job 5 days a week to all of a sudden having nothing to do during the day. I have known people that have lost jobs, and it's like, once you get through the anger period, there's this short period of time where it's like, oh, yay, I get a little vacation here. And then reality sets in where there's not a paycheck coming in, and, the pressures of getting a job sink in. If people aren't familiar with the unemployment system, if they're not familiar with job supports that are available out there in a community, then that is the area where a career counselor can really come in and link and connect people to those resources that are available. So let's think about moving into Chapter 14. Again, I wasn't going to keep you forever here because we got a lot of content this week. But if we're thinking about adults and career development and transitions of working adults, so there are different stages that we go through in adulthood, and when we're thinking about careers. We have those early years of employment where we're getting established in our career. We have kind of the middle age of employment, the mid-career, the maintenance stage, where ideally we're kind of situated in our career, we're happy with where it's going, maybe there's some room for movement, and then on kind of approaching retirement and towards that end stage of career, depending on where somebody is, if they're working with a career counselor, it may be that, somebody is in that early stage of their career, and they get into the career that they think was their dream career, and they realize, wow, I really dislike this career. I really don't like this job. It was something I thought I wanted to do. I thought I was prepared. Here I am, and I hate it. And so it may be that somebody is really wanting to kind of shift focus on what they're going to be doing in the long term. The career maintenance stage, it may be that somebody is content and happy, somebody has established kind of their managerial style potentially, but there may also be kind of the additional stressors that come in, and work, of course, and the stress that comes along with work can often flow right into our personal lives, as we know. And so when we're thinking about things that influence our happiness and our quality of life, our overall quality of life, certainly satisfaction in our career and the level of stress are important considerations. I think we all know now that our workforce is aging, and with that brings certain considerations when we're looking at the older adults that are in our population, and how, from a rehabilitation counseling perspective, if we're working with somebody that is an older adult who wants to continue working or who needs to continue working past that standard age of retirement, there may be some physical limitations somebody has. Things like hearing loss and vision loss, that are age-related, those types of limitations may need accommodations, and certainly we need to be addressing any kind of issues that come along with age discrimination, performance issues that could come up for individuals that are kind of approaching those late stages of their career. So thinking about really shifting focus here into work and recovery, if we're thinking about individuals who are in recovery, and the area of work and recovery is relatively unexplored in terms of the research that's out there and available in literature and all of that, that's not news to us, again, that anybody that is in recovery, when somebody has sought treatment, they have been in recovery for a certain period of time, at some point they're going to need to be finding a place of employment. There's a lot of different issues that come in with that, though. So depending on the age of the individual, when they started using education might be severely insufficient or incomplete. Somebody may have completed a high school degree, or they may still need to go back and get their GED. Somebody may have completed some college courses and then subsequently dropped out. So education might be a really big focus for an individual who's in recovery and ready to explore getting back into the workforce. There may not be a support system, or the traditional type of support system that we might think of when we are wanting that in our lives. So it may be that they're not able to go back to their family and engage with them to get support to help them find a good career pathway. Individuals may really be having kind of dealing with and continuing to deal with their view of themselves, which is often a negative perception of who they are, or just really not knowing what their purpose in life or what their potential could be. So there are a number of different interventions, of course, if we're thinking about working with somebody that's in recovery and ready to go back to work. That basic mental health counseling can be very useful, and ideally, if somebody's in recovery, they're continuing to seek that type of treatment and that type of support from a counseling environment, or even peer counseling as well. Doing those interest inventories, doing the job shadowing, the resume development. The resume may not be existent, and somebody may not even have a resume at all. It may be that you're kind of modifying a resume so that instead of putting specific dates with months, you're just kind of looking at the year range that somebody might have been working. You could be just changing how things are worded, putting relevant experience as a heading rather than work history, because people may have some volunteer experience, or maybe we're doing jobs where they're non-traditional jobs, and it still could be put down on a resume as experience of some sort, but it's not exactly work history. Other interventions, going to the job fairs, of course, participating in peer support groups. Other things to consider, if we're thinking about what a resume looks like, on the main part of the resume under our names, we typically have our phone number, our email, and our address. And so we have to consider, if we're working with somebody that's in recovery, are they living in a transitional housing? Are they living in transitional housing? If so, when is that expected to end? Is that an address that they want to be putting down on a resume? Because if somebody is using Google Maps and they're looking up the address, and the potential employer sees that transitional housing facility pop up, that could trigger some stigma that's still really clearly there with employers. If the client doesn't have a phone, are there ways that a client could get a phone, or could have access to reliable internet so they can continue to check emails? Does the client have interview clothes? Does the client know how to dress for an interview? Do they have the available transportation to get to an interview, or do they have the money to access the transportation that might be available? So there are a lot of different things that might need to be considered if a career counselor is working with somebody that's in recovery and ready to go back to work. And one thing that I wasn't able to dig a lot deeper in for this module, of course, was incarceration and having a record or a felony that comes up or pops up in the system, or that somebody might have to report. Now, we've seen kind of movement certain states where employers aren't asking that type of information anymore, aren't asking if somebody has been convicted of a felony in the past. But if that is something that is still being asked, a career counselor certainly would need to know how to address that with their client as they're going through an application process, or maybe even needs to go out and establish those community connections, those employer connections, so that they're able to open the doors for some of their clients that maybe do have a criminal record. Okay, I hope that was short and sweet enough. We're getting in under 15 minutes here, so that's good. And if you guys need anything as we move on through the next couple of weeks, please feel free to email me or post on the discussion board.